In the winter of 2019, a small town in rural Oregon became the center of one of the most disturbing unsolved cases in recent memory. What started as strange phone calls quickly spiraled into something far more sinister. This is a story about obsession, terror, and the darkness that can hide in plain sight. This is the story of the Midnight Caller. Sarah Mitchell was a 32-year-old elementary school teacher, living alone in the quiet town of Ravens Creek, Oregon. Population 3,847. The kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where doors are often left unlocked, and where nothing ever happens. It was 11:47 p.m. when Sarah's landline rang for the first time. She almost didn't answer. Who calls that late? But thinking it might be an emergency with her elderly parents, she picked up. There was no voice on the other end. Just breathing. Heavy, deliberate breathing. And then, after what felt like an eternity, a whisper. Sarah couldn't make out the words, but the tone was unmistakable. It was threatening. She hung up immediately and tried to shake it off. Wrong number, a prank, kids being stupid. But at exactly midnight, the phone rang again. Sarah looked at her windows. The curtains were drawn. She was alone. She told the caller to stop and hung up. Her hands were shaking now. She unplugged the landline from the wall. At 12:30 a.m., her cell phone rang. Unknown number. She didn't answer, but the voicemail that followed would haunt her for months. The voice described the layout of her home, the color of her bedroom walls, the book she'd been reading before bed. Details only someone who had been inside could know. Sarah called 911. Detective James Holder responded to Sarah's call that night. He'd been with the Ravens Creek Police Department for 19 years and had never handled anything like this. A thorough search of Sarah's property revealed nothing. No signs of forced entry, no footprints outside her windows. Security cameras on neighboring houses showed no suspicious activity. But the calls didn't stop. Every night at midnight, Sarah's phone would ring. Sometimes her landline, sometimes her cell, sometimes both at once. The caller always knew things they shouldn't. What she'd eaten for dinner, what show she was watching, what she was wearing. After 2 weeks of this, Sarah moved in with her sister across town. She changed her phone numbers, both of them. The calls followed her. Now the caller was describing her sister's house, the new location. Sarah hadn't told anyone outside her immediate family where she was staying. The police set up traces on the phone lines. They monitored her calls. And that's when things got truly bizarre. The calls were coming from phone numbers that didn't exist. Numbers with too many digits or with area codes that had never been assigned. On one occasion, the police traced a call back to a phone number that had been disconnected in 1987. And it got stranger. Detective Holder began digging into the town's history. He discovered something disturbing. Every 7 years, going back to 1985, Ravens Creek had experienced similar cases. A resident would receive mysterious midnight phone calls. The pattern would last exactly 28 days, and then the victim would vanish. In 1985, it was Timothy Brooks, a 45-year-old accountant. Midnight calls for 28 days. On day 29, he disappeared from his locked bedroom while his wife slept in the next room. 1992, Jennifer Lawson, age 29. Same pattern. She vanished from her car in her own garage. The garage door was locked from the inside. 1999, Marcus Chen, age 38. Gone without a trace after the 28th night of calls. 2006, Amy Rodriguez, age 34. Her disappearance was witnessed by her husband. He reported that she simply faded away in front of him, becoming transparent before vanishing completely. 2013, the pattern should have continued, but no one reported receiving calls that year. Detective Holder found this suspicious. He dug deeper. In 2013, a man named David Preston had died suddenly of a heart attack on December 15th, exactly 2 weeks into what would have been the calling period. His medical records showed he'd been suffering from severe anxiety and sleep deprivation. His wife mentioned he'd been receiving weird phone calls, but dismissed them as telemarketer harassment. Now it was 2019, 7 years later, and Sarah Mitchell was 15 days into her ordeal. She had 13 days left. Detective Holder didn't tell Sarah about the pattern. He couldn't. What could he possibly say? Instead, he assigned officers to watch her around the clock. He consulted with FBI specialists in stalking and electronic harassment. Nothing helped. Sarah stopped sleeping. The calls had started coming during the day, too, though midnight remained the worst. The voice had become more aggressive, more possessive. It spoke of taking her home and completing the cycle. On day 23, something unprecedented happened. Every phone in Ravens Creek rang at midnight. Landlines, cell phones, business lines, every single one. And on each line, residents heard the same thing. 5 more days. The town descended into chaos. People disconnected their phones. Some families left town entirely. The media caught wind of the story, and Ravens Creek was flooded with reporters, paranormal investigators, and curiosity seekers. Sarah Mitchell, meanwhile, had deteriorated. She barely ate. She couldn't sleep. Police protection meant nothing when the tormentor could reach her through any electronic device. On day 23, she was admitted to the hospital for exhaustion and dehydration. Detective Holder stayed with her personally, determined to break the pattern. December 30th, 2019. Day 28. The final day. At 11:50 p.m., every electronic device in the hospital failed. Lights, monitors, phones, everything. Emergency generators kicked in, but communication systems remained dead. Detective Holder never left Sarah's side. He and 2 other officers were in the room with her. The door was locked, the window was on the 4th floor. At 11:59 p.m., Sarah sat up in bed. Her eyes were open but unfocused. Holder tried to talk to her, but she didn't respond. The room temperature dropped dramatically. Their breath became visible in the air. And then, at exactly midnight, Sarah spoke. But it wasn't her voice. She spoke in the voice of the midnight caller. "It's time," the voice said through her. "The cycle is complete." According to the official police report, what happened next defies explanation. Sarah Mitchell began to fade. Her body became translucent, like looking through colored glass. Detective Holder reached for her, tried to grab her arm, but his hand passed through her as if she was made of smoke. Within seconds, she was gone. Vanished completely. The 3 officers were left alone in a room that was now deathly silent. The hospital systems came back online at 12:01 a.m. Sarah Mitchell was never seen again. The case remains open and unsolved. No body was ever found. No trace of Sarah Mitchell exists beyond December 30th, 2019. Detective Holder retired 6 months later. He refused all interviews except one where he stated simply, "Some things can't be explained, and some patterns can't be broken." The question that haunts Ravens Creek now is simple. It's been 7 years since Sarah Mitchell vanished. 7 years since the midnight caller last completed their cycle. December 2026 is approaching. The town is waiting, watching their phones, wondering who will be chosen next. Because in Ravens Creek, patterns repeat. And at midnight, the phone always rings. If you live in a small town, and your phone rings at midnight, maybe don't answer.
In March 2018, a family moved into a renovated Victorian house in Providence, Rhode Island. The Harpers, Daniel, his wife Michelle, and their 2 children, ages 7 and 10. The house had been empty for 3 years before they bought it. The previous owners left in a hurry, but the realtor said it was just a divorce situation, nothing suspicious. Everything seemed normal for the first week. Then Daniel's daughter Emma mentioned something strange. She said there was an extra staircase in the house that appeared at night. Daniel and Michelle dismissed it as a child's imagination. Kids see things in old houses. Shadows become monsters. Creaky floors become footsteps. But then their son Lucas mentioned it too. He said that at exactly 3:17 a.m., a staircase appeared in the hallway upstairs, a staircase that went up. But their house was only 2 stories, and above the second floor was just the attic crawl space. Daniel decided to stay up one night to prove to his kids there was nothing there. He set up a camera in the upstairs hallway and waited. At 3:17 a.m., he heard it, a sound like wood settling. And when he looked down the hallway, there it was, a staircase, perfectly constructed with an ornate banister, leading up to a door that definitely wasn't there during the day. The door was slightly ajar, and warm light spilled out from whatever was beyond it. Daniel's rational mind tried to explain it: sleep deprivation, hallucination, carbon monoxide. But his camera was recording. This was real. He approached the stairs slowly. Each step groaned under his weight, even though the staircase hadn't existed minutes before. As he climbed, he heard sounds from beyond the door, voices, a party, laughter and music from another era, like a recording from the 1920s. He reached the top step. The door was inches from his face now. He could smell cigarette smoke and perfume. The voices were clearer. Someone was talking about the stock market. Someone else laughed about prohibition. Daniel reached for the door handle. And then his wife screamed his name from downstairs. He turned, and in that instant, everything changed. The staircase vanished. He fell 12 feet, crashing onto the hallway floor below. Broken arm, 3 cracked ribs, severe concussion. When he recovered enough to speak, he told Michelle everything. She thought it was the head injury talking, until she checked the camera footage. The video showed Daniel walking toward the wall, then climbing invisible stairs. His feet moved as if ascending, but there was nothing beneath him. He floated higher and higher, his hands reaching for something that wasn't there. And then he fell. But here's what made them leave the house. In the background of the video, barely visible, you could see something else. As Daniel climbed the invisible stairs, a figure appeared at the bottom, watching him. A woman in a 1920s dress. She was smiling, and when Daniel fell, she looked directly at the camera. Then she disappeared. The Harpers moved out the next day. They later discovered that the house had been the site of a speakeasy in 1923. During a raid, a secret staircase leading to a hidden third floor had collapsed, killing 17 people. The house has been sold 4 times since the Harpers left. No family has stayed longer than 3 months. The current owners refuse to discuss why they're trying to sell. But according to neighbors, if you watch the house at exactly 3:17 a.m., sometimes you can see lights in a window that doesn't exist during the day. And sometimes you can hear the party still going on.
In the summer of 2021, a podcast about unsolved mysteries called The Night Files released what would be their final episode. The show was hosted by Marcus Webb, a former journalist who'd spent 5 years investigating cold cases and paranormal phenomena. He had a modest but dedicated following of about 50,000 listeners.
Episode 127 was supposed to be about an abandoned psychiatric hospital in upstate New York. Marcus had spent 3 days there alone, recording audio and collecting stories from locals about strange occurrences. The episode began normally. Marcus introduced the topic, gave historical background on the hospital, and started describing his first night there. His voice was calm, professional, exactly what listeners expected. But around the 15-minute mark, something changed. Marcus stopped mid-sentence. There was silence for nearly 30 seconds. Then he spoke again, but his voice was different, tense. "Did you hear that?" he asked. Another pause. Listeners assumed he was hearing something in the hospital, part of the investigation. "Someone just said my name," Marcus continued. "But I'm alone here. The building is locked. I'm the only one with a key." He kept recording. Over the next hour, Marcus documented what he was experiencing. Footsteps in empty corridors, doors opening and closing, and repeatedly, a voice calling his name. But here's what made listeners uneasy. Marcus began responding to the voice, having conversations with it, except listeners could only hear Marcus's side. "How do you know about that?" he asked at one point. "That's not public information. That's not in any records." More silence. "No, I'm not going there. That wing is structurally unsafe." The episode continued for 2 hours, far longer than Marcus's usual format. His demeanor shifted from curious to frightened to something else, something almost resigned. At the 147 mark, Marcus said something that made thousands of listeners pause their players. "You're not talking to me, are you? You're talking to them, to the people listening." Silence. "And they can't hear you. Only I can. Why?" More silence. Then Marcus laughed. It wasn't a natural laugh. It was the sound of someone who just understood something terrible. "Oh God. Oh no. You're not in the hospital. You've never been in the hospital. You're in the recordings. You're in the audio itself. That's how you've been following me. Every episode, every investigation, you've been there the whole time, and I've been broadcasting you to thousands of people." Long pause. "What do you want?" Another pause. "Listeners," Marcus said, his voice barely a whisper, "I need you to stop the episode. Right now. Delete it. Don't finish listening. It needs—" He was cut off by a sound. A sound that audio engineers later analyzed and couldn't identify. It wasn't human, but it wasn't anything else they recognized either. Marcus screamed. The episode continued for another 12 minutes, but there were no more words, just sounds, struggling, things breaking, and underneath it all, a frequency that several listeners reported made them feel physically ill. Then silence. The episode ended. Marcus Webb was reported missing 3 days later when he failed to return from his trip. Police found his equipment in the psychiatric hospital, still recording, but the digital files were corrupted, unrecoverable. Except for episode 127, which had already been uploaded to podcast platforms. Within days, listeners began reporting strange experiences. They heard their names whispered during other podcasts. Their phones would call their own numbers. Some reported seeing a figure in their peripheral vision while wearing headphones. The podcast platform removed the episode after 2 weeks following hundreds of complaints, but by then, It had been downloaded over 100,000 times. And here's the thing that keeps investigators up at night. Every person who listened to the complete episode, all the way to the end, reported the same dream. They're in an empty hospital, walking down a dark corridor. Doors on either side are opening one by one, and from each doorway, they hear their own voice calling their name. When they turn around to leave, Marcus Webb is standing there. It's listening. It's always listening. Then they wake up. Marcus Webb has never been found. The psychiatric hospital burned down in a fire of unknown origins 6 months after his disappearance. But sometimes, late at night, people browsing old podcast archives find episode 127 still there, uploaded under different names, different accounts. And if you're foolish enough to press play, you might hear your name too. Just remember, once you hear it, it knows you're listening, and it will never stop talking.
In October 2020, an urban explorer named Tyler Chen broke into an abandoned mansion outside of Seattle. The place was known locally as the Mirror House, built in 1904 by a wealthy eccentric named Theodore Blackwell. Blackwell had been obsessed with mirrors. Every wall in the house was covered with them. Hundreds of mirrors of all shapes and sizes, creating an infinite labyrinth of reflections. The house had been abandoned since 1952, when Blackwell's last living relative died under mysterious circumstances. The city had tried to demolish it twice, but construction crews refused to continue after the first day. They reported feeling watched, hearing whispers, seeing movement in reflections that didn't match reality. Tyler had explored dozens of abandoned buildings. He didn't believe in ghosts or curses. He went in with his camera, his flashlight, and a rational mind. The first hour was normal. He documented the decay, the architectural details, the way mirrors had cracked and warped over decades. His camera captured it all. But then he noticed something in his footage. When he reviewed the last few minutes, he saw that his reflection didn't always match his movements. Small discrepancies, a half-second delay, his reflection turning its head before he did. Tyler thought it was a trick of the broken mirrors, distortion, angle of light. He kept exploring. In what used to be the main ballroom, Tyler found something that made him stop. One mirror, larger than the others, was completely intact. No cracks, no dust, perfectly clean. In a house where everything else had rotted for 70 years, this mirror looked brand new. He approached it slowly, camera recording. His reflection approached too, matching him step for step. But when Tyler stopped, his reflection took one more step forward. Tyler stood frozen. In the mirror, his reflection was now closer to the glass than he was. It smiled. Tyler wasn't smiling. Then his reflection spoke. The audio on Tyler's camera picked it up clearly. "I've been waiting for you." Tyler ran. He posted the footage online that night. It went viral. Skeptics called it a hoax, an elaborate fake. Believers said it proved the house was haunted. Tyler himself insisted it was real, but refused to explain what happened after he stopped recording. Because there was more. He just didn't post it. After he ran from the ballroom, Tyler got lost. The house was a maze of mirrors, and in his panic, he couldn't find the way out. Every corridor looked the same, every reflection multiplied into infinity.
And in every mirror, his reflection wasn't quite right. Sometimes it was ahead of him, sometimes behind, sometimes it wore different clothes. Sometimes it was injured, bleeding from wounds Tyler didn't have. Then he started seeing other reflections, people who weren't there. A woman in Victorian dress, a child in pajamas, an old man in a suit, all staring at him from inside the mirrors. Tyler found an exit after 3 hours. When he emerged, his hair had gone white at the temples. He was 28 years old. The footage he didn't post showed something else. In the background of every shot, barely visible, was Theodore Blackwell himself. Standing in mirrors Tyler never looked at directly, watching, waiting. And in the final frame before Tyler's camera died, Blackwell was smiling. Because he wasn't the only one who'd become trapped in the mirrors. Tyler's life fell apart over the next year. He became obsessed with mirrors. He covered every reflective surface in his apartment. He avoided windows, screens, anything that could show his reflection. His friends said he wasn't the same person anymore. He'd grown quiet, paranoid. He talked about seeing himself in places he'd never been. He said his reflection was living a different life, making different choices. In October 2021, exactly a year after visiting the Mirror House, Tyler disappeared. His apartment was found empty. No signs of struggle, no note. But every mirror he'd covered had been uncovered. And on his bathroom mirror, written in what looked like condensation, was a message: "Welcome home." The Mirror House still stands. The city gave up trying to demolish it. Urban explorers still break in occasionally, despite the warnings. Most leave within minutes, unnerved by something they can't quite explain. But some never leave at all. Local police have investigated 17 missing persons cases connected to the Mirror House since 1952. No bodies have ever been found. But if you go there at dusk, when the light hits the windows just right, you can see figures moving inside the mirrors. Dozens of them, maybe hundreds, all trapped in the glass, all waiting for someone else to look.
On February 14th, 2017, television viewers in Wyoming experienced something that has never been fully explained. At exactly 11:43 p.m., every channel was interrupted by the same broadcast. Cable, satellite, streaming services, everything. Even phones and computers streaming video content showed the same thing. A black screen with white text. "This is not a test." The message stayed for 10 seconds. Then it was replaced by footage. The video showed an empty room, concrete walls, no windows, a single metal door. The camera was stationary, pointing at the door. There was no sound except a low hum, like electrical interference. Nothing happened for 3 minutes. Viewers assumed it was a hack, a prank, maybe an emergency broadcast system malfunction. Then the door opened. A man walked in, middle-aged, wearing ordinary clothes, looking confused. He looked directly at the camera and spoke, but there was no audio. His lips moved frantically. He seemed to be asking for help. Behind him, the door closed. The man tried the handle. It didn't open. He pounded on the door. Still no sound. Just that continuous electrical hum. He searched the room. There was nothing. No furniture, no other exits, no vents, just concrete walls and the door that wouldn't open. The man started to panic. You could see it in his body language. He was screaming now, though viewers still couldn't hear him. Then he noticed the camera. He approached it, desperate, pleading. He pressed his face close to the lens, tears streaming down his face, mouthing words. "Help me. Please. Help me." The broadcast continued for 47 minutes. Viewers across Wyoming watched as the man slowly lost hope. He sat against the wall, rocked back and forth, stared at nothing. And then at 12:30 a.m., something entered the room. No one could quite describe what they saw. Reports varied wildly. Some said it was a shadow that moved against the light. Others said it was humanoid, but wrong. Proportions that didn't make sense. A few claimed they couldn't look directly at it, that their eyes refused to focus on it. The man in the room saw it, though. He scrambled to his feet, backing into the corner, silent screaming again. The thing approached him slowly. The camera angle never changed. It captured everything. What happened next lasted less than a minute, but thousands of people reported having nightmares about it for months afterward. The man simply ceased to exist. Not violently. He didn't collapse or fall. He just gradually became less real, like watching someone fade out of a photograph. His features blurred, his body became translucent, and then he was gone. The thing remained in the room for a moment longer. Then it moved toward the camera. The screen went black. Regular programming resumed at 12:31 a.m. The FCC launched an immediate investigation. They found no evidence of hacking, no unauthorized signals, no technical explanation for how every device in the state had shown the same content simultaneously. They interviewed hundreds of witnesses. Everyone described the same broadcast, but here's what disturbed investigators most. Some viewers recorded the broadcast on their phones or DVRs. When they reviewed the footage, it showed something different each time. One recording showed the room empty the entire time. No man, no creature, just an empty concrete room for 47 minutes. Another recording showed the man, but he was different. Different clothes, different age, different face entirely. A third recording showed multiple people in the room appearing and disappearing throughout the broadcast. No two recordings were identical. The only consistent element was the final message. After the screen went black, a single line of text appeared for exactly 1 second. Subject 412, extraction complete. 3 days after the broadcast, a man named Robert Mills was reported missing from Casper, Wyoming. His wife said he'd gone to bed normally on February 14th, but never woke up. The bed looked slept in, but Robert was gone. His description matched the man in the broadcast, down to the clothes he'd been wearing that night. The investigation stalled. The FCC closed the case as an unexplained technical anomaly. Robert Mills was never found. But here's what keeps conspiracy theorists obsessed with this case. The number at the end of the broadcast. Subject 412. If this was Subject 412, what happened to the first 411? And in December 2017, it happened again. Same interruption, same format, different room, different person, different number. Subject 521. It's happened 6 more times since then, in different states, always with no warning. The numbers keep going up. The last one was in September 2024. Subject 1847. No one knows who's broadcasting these videos. No one knows where these rooms are located. No one knows what happens to the people who appear in them, but they're all missing. And the numbers suggest this has been happening for a very long time. If you see your television screen go black at an unusual time, if you see those words, "This is not a test," pay attention to the number, because someday that might be you in the room, and no one watching will be able to help.